Good morning. This is the Focus on Parliament show on Civic Space TV, brought to you by the Center for Constitutional Governance. My name is Kwagala, and I'm your host. The issue of human rights continues to dominate public political debate in the country. This week, we've seen the State Minister for Internal Affairs present a report on the floor of Parliament, explaining and defending the human rights record of government, something that has generated a lot of debate and reactions from the quarters of the opposition, who strongly dispute the contents of the same. Now, joining me to discuss today's topic, which is accountability for human rights violations in the country, is a panel of two esteemed gentlemen and a lady. Mr. Joseph Ochieno, you're most welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here, and always a pleasure to be backed by my beautiful sister here, let alone the young gentleman.
Thank you. Mrs. Charity Ahimbisibwe.
Happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation. But I also thought I should call out something I saw today afternoon. Ugandans like talking about Rwanda being clean and beautiful. But I was passing next to a bus near Wandegea, and the guys are just throwing pills and food packages onto the road. From inside the bus, you see a plate of food landing with rice. I said, Jesus, we are so gone. Honestly, every Ugandan, stop this mix. So irritating.
That's it.
Those are violations of environmental, basic environmental rights.
Basic environment rights. And we're talking about rights today, Cedric. I decided to take it off there.
Good, good.
Thank you for that patriotic guidance. And last but not least, Mr. Timothy Chemonges. Do I get the pronunciation right?
Yeah, Chemonges is the right pronunciation.
You're most welcome to
Thank
the show,
you so
sir.
much, and good morning to our viewers. Glad to be here. Hope to venture and explore the discussion further.
Let me begin with you, Mr. Ochieno. I would prefer to use our native names.
Yeah.
I hope it sits well with you.
That's basically my best. Yes.
All right. Now, for context, the restoration of the rule of law, the respect and promotion of human rights and democracy was a self-stated objective of the NRM as justification to launch the 5-year Bush War. We've seen a lot change, especially in the most recent past, in the run-up to the 2021 general elections and the immediate aftermath. What is your assessment of this government's human rights record?
And as I was coming to the studios, I just remembered that it was November the 2nd, 1987, when as a young student, very comfortable in my room in Mitchell Hall in Makerere University, a bunch of NRA bandits came into my room, arrested me, took me to police cell, took me from police cell to various other places. I experienced go-downs, they were calling them then. These days we now know they're safe houses. When students wanted to protest at Mitchell, not university, but at Mitchell, I was reproduced. I found myself on 4th floor Parliamentary buildings. That's President's office, Mr. Museveni's office. One of those offices then, it possibly wasn't necessarily being there at the time. And the rest of it is that November 22nd, I successfully managed to escape out of the country. 1987, just 18 months after NRA had been in power. In between then, I had beaten 7 roadblocks between Kampala, old Kampala and to be precise, and Entebbe. In the aircraft, I was nearly removed, but that's a story from my memoirs. Now, that is 18 months of NRA and 18 months of torture, including myself being tortured. That's not human rights. Fast forward between then and today, 35 years, and 35 years plus 1 month. We are discussing human rights abuses. And you indeed talk about the records of NRA, including them going to the bush. Museveni went to the bush officially on February 6th or 7th, 1981. That was hardly 5 weeks after Milton Obote's elected government had come into power. Tell me anybody who went with Museveni to the bush, who in the right common sense minds can assess the performance of a government in 5 weeks and then determine that the human rights abuses alleged as they were are so rampant, so obvious that there is no option but to go to the bush. This to Museveni, somebody who had lost elections in Mbarara, to be precise, in Mbarara North, lost elections, did not go to court in Mbarara, but this guy opted to find his way somehow from Mbarara to Luwero bushes, just like somehow some Balalo find their ways all the way from Tanzania, Rwanda, somewhere in Congo, all the way to Acholi land. Point is this, that this regime is as fake, and I'm using not fake that Ugandans like to use, fake in terms of contextual terms, if you Google, as fake today as they were in 1981, and as fake as they've ever been. And this matter of human rights abuse in this country is one that, as we discuss today, and we discuss it on a parliament channel, I hope that current legislators in parliament wake up to realize that most of them have been taken for a ride, and to suggest in terms of the responses that we saw going to the floor of parliament, where NRA ministers seek to dismiss political leaders of this country, particular opposition statements about human rights abuses, which are so apparent, so obvious, the kind of stuff that happened in 2021, something I never thought would ever happen in my country. Certainly not after Idi Amin and even the difficult moments that we had between July 1985 and when NRA came to power. It's extraordinary. So now, in terms of human rights violations, this regime has been the worst since independence. In fact, I can say this regime has been the worst since Uganda was created, because I don't even know during a colonial time pre our independence, when the kind of abuses recorded under NRA, meaning under Mr. Museveni, can ever be compared to any. Never. And so it's too difficult to suggest that you ask me to give them a rating, because if you ask me to give them a rating, I will not give them 0. I'll say that these guys need to be tried instead for their criminal records as a regime. That these guys need to be taken not to The Hague, perhaps, but to the East African Court of Human Rights. I think the lawyers are here. I don't know. But no, Mr. Museveni and his entire regime ought to be in Lozira as far as human rights abuse is concerned.
If I may ask the question before I come to you, Charity, who do you think in the context of today's political and human rights dispensation bears the ultimate responsibility for these violations?
Mr. Museveni. Mr. Museveni is the commander-in-chief. Mr. Museveni boasts. I have a statement there which I saw he generated from State House the other day, allegedly on the Balalo, 10th of October, rather 10th of November. And he claims that he has been at this battle since 1965. So as a young person in 1965, Museveni has been mobilized and organizing a particular category of Ugandans to be lured into his Fronasa thing and then later into his NRA thing to what it is. He's been the commander in that and the director of the entirety of the operations. But whatever the case, he's actually been the commander-in-chief of NRA since January 25th, actually, it was not 26th, 25th, 1986. So he takes absolute responsibility. The other thing, as I said from the introduction, that considering the manner in which these guys came into power and the allegations that they made against the previous administrations, is actually rather rich that some of the human rights abuses that have taken place under them would continue as impunity. There is a sense of impunity, the sense of entitlement in NRA, which I actually genuinely find shocking. But whereas I've actually suggested that these guys ought to be in Lozira, as Ochieno of Nagongera, and as Ochieno of UPC, and also Ochieno was the leader of UPC, and also as Ochieno who has campaigned for return to multipartyism in this country, but also Ochieno who has campaigned and exposed human rights abuses in this country, including almost apparent genocide by NRA in northern Uganda and elsewhere. I have also been very definitive about this, that time must be now for you younger citizens of this country to be given a chance, to be given an opportunity. And that's why I feel very strongly about it, that I think it's important that we can no longer want to seek to hang people. And that's why Museveni should actually give us a break, just go away and let young Ugandans begin to mobilize and organize so that we begin to have a national debate, a national conversation about some of the issues that I've raised. They're very apparent. Museveni has got no apparent capacity to respond to them because they're factual in defense. We deal with the difficult past, pre-Museveni, and the difficult past of Mr. Museveni's atrocious 37 years. And we deal with the difficult present, where a leader of opposition is humiliated, where leaders of opposition are dropped onto pickup trucks as if they're criminals, and where parliamentarians, even right now, we have one who's possibly critically ill. We deal with those ones. But also then we go ahead and deal with the process of national healing, so that we investigate Luwero and then we heal Luwero. We investigate Karamoja and then we deal with Karamoja. We investigate Kasese and then we deal with Kasese in terms of healing. We investigate Northern Uganda, particularly post-conflict Acholi, and seek to heal Acholi. But that we do so instead, we see Mr. Museveni seeking to now use Acholi as a cattle ranch for his dubious balalo. So this does not help. So you, the young citizens of this country, need to be able to be part of this conversation beyond this debate about basic human rights abuse under Museveni, for which he is directly responsible, but to seek to reconcile and make sure that we heal and forgive one another. And in the only extreme case, should we find, I don't believe in hanging, should we take people for life in prison, but that we give an opportunity for young citizens in this country to make sure that this country has a future. And this is a fantastic country, but Uganda is a fantastic country. I travel around the world, I travel around the continent. Uganda is a fantastic country, but unfortunately, it's only Uganda. Even this morning I was talking to a friend in America. It's only in Uganda where you find citizens become third-class citizens of their own country. And it's only in Uganda where you find leaders boast about dubious investors, meaning other people come first. No, I think you young citizens of this country need to make sure that you claim this country, and with some of us who are in the early afternoon of our lives, be able to enable you so that you're able to begin to determine your own future.
Charity, Mr. Ochieno points the finger of responsibility to the president. We have a president who has consistently, in his interactions with the media, but also with human rights actors, he's consistently denied human rights violations as are alleged by several quarters in the country, that his government commits atrocities against the citizens. But what we see is a very grim and stark contradiction of what he says. And this has gone on. We've seen the Attorney General in Parliament make flat denials also in that respect. What do you think exactly is the problem? Is there some sort of breakdown in government in terms of communication? Or we have a master who is someone that is a master at double speak, who says one thing and does the exact opposite?
Very complicated question there. But I think I want to approach it from the ground of why human rights and why would we hold a whole conversation about it, and why should the president defend or not defend his human rights record? And why do we report about human rights internationally? Why do we go having to write our human rights record in a document and report to Geneva and then report to the UN Council that for us, this is what we have done in terms of our human rights record? Because the genesis of human rights is they are inherent. God gave them to us. And the laws only documented what God had given us. Laws are made simply to enable a society to live at peace with itself. So that is why it is important to keep track of the human rights record and to report on whether that record is healthy or it is not healthy, and to check how to improve the health of that record. I think Joseph has given a contextual analysis of the past, of the present, and I want to say of the present continuous. That we came from a place where people would be killed and no accountability would happen. And then somewhere when governments had changed, it looked like, okay, the new government came with a lot of promises. And the promises were followed by laws and institutions being set up. Institutions such as Uganda Human Rights Commission, Parliament was established, justice systems were improved. Even right now, we're talking about judges being increased in courts to hear cases so that we don't have backlog. And the reason I approach it from where I am approaching it from is a question of, can we find, how do we improve what we know is already a green picture? Because the truth of the matter is, there is not a good picture about human rights in Uganda currently. We have constitutional clauses which talk about upholding the dignity of people, no arbitrary arrests, the liberties of people being guaranteed, everybody being equal under the law. But if I asked Ugandans themselves to assess, is it true we are all equal under the law? I will leave that question to Ugandans, even the ones seated on this panel. Maybe Chemonges is more important under the law than I am, because he will get into prison, he'll do one phone call, and he's out. Joseph talked about a time he was at the university and he was arrested. Personal liberty is a critical article in the Constitution. It's Article 23. How much has the NRM government, led by President Museveni, upheld, for example, just Article 23? We need to do those assessments ourselves, because this is our own constitution. This is our own document that we say we are going to live by. And if we cannot own it, then whose is it? So the president has, on the occasion of 2021, came out and said, look, the first statement he released after the 2021 elections and the shootings, he said, some soldiers acted inept. And he said he was going to punish the people who were responsible for certain killings that were uncalled for. Those were his words. We are waiting to know who was punished, because we don't know who was, but he promised in his own statement. And the reason he did that is because there was a father who was killed on a building somewhere. He had just come shopping. Then suddenly a stray bullet came from nowhere and it hit him. There was a girl who was trying to record violence on the street. She was using her phone. And a sniper turned the gun on her and shot so many live bullets to her direction. She dived. I don't know if you remember that recording. It was all over social media. And so the president said, no, soldiers are not supposed to attack citizens like that. But you've seen a citizen, he has nothing to do with the violence that is going on, but you're directing a gun at them. So he said, I'm going to bring them to book. And in terms of accountability, we now need to know which soldiers were apprehended for those acts, because he said it himself.
For your information, the contents of the report that was read in Parliament by the State Minister for Internal Affairs, it makes mention of 2 cases of soldiers that were apprehended, prosecuted, and convicted for some of those crimes. But my question specifically is in respect of the president's attitude to this problem. If you were to appraise the president's attitude in respect of the human rights record of his government, what would you say? Because we see some sort of mismatch between his rhetoric vis-a-vis the actions.
You see, for me, the fact that he still has the document called the Constitution around means once in a while he wakes up and remembers that there's a document around. I had a president here called Amin who suspended the Constitution. We had an abrogation of a Constitution and a new one instituted at one time in the past. So if, for me, if that document still exists, it means that President Museveni gladiates between 2 positions. Sometimes looks like he's not following the human rights that he believes in, and other times he does actually go back and remember that the important thing was for the people, by the people, and he was elected by the same citizens. Once in a while, he does that.
So you're convinced that he's a believer in human rights?
I am convinced
Notwithstanding
that
grim reality.
his record is not impeccable. Okay? His record is not impeccable, and I'm not defending his record on human rights. But I am convinced that since he has not banned the Constitution in its current form, because the Constitution has the whole Bill of Rights, chapter 4, he could have said, you know, slash down that chapter. I no longer want anything to do with rights. Who will stop him? Who will stop him? Nobody. Because there is one who ever did it. Nobody will stop him, and he will decide to have any mass abuse of human rights without any form of accountability, without anything happening. And you know, and Ugandans will go back to crying. So the fact that there is some justice system still existing somewhere, and once in a while he comes to tell us stories which sometimes do not tally, it means there is a part of his consciousness that knows that doing bad is not right. And that part of his consciousness, every once in a while, he goes back to it to defend some of the human rights. We would not have had accountability happening in Parliament if he still did not believe in any form of human rights. So I want to believe that the president may have made mistakes. Anybody makes mistakes, but he still believes in some level of human rights.
Timothy, the Honorable Minister for Justice, Norbert Mao, just the other week at a convention of human rights defenders here in Kampala, came out in his address to the congregation and stated rather firmly that he considers the human rights record of this government as something that he can no longer defend. This is a minister that is primarily responsible for upholding the human rights of Ugandans as spelled out in the Constitution. Does this point to some sort of irresponsibility? Is it a question of a lack of sensitivity to the needs of Ugandans, or it is simply a pointer to what we should expect, that after all, this is the NRM government. It has no concern whatsoever for the promotion or the protection or respect for human rights and the rule of law?
Thank you. I think it's primarily on the issue of being in the wrong place at the right time. So if you have the Minister of Justice in a democratic dispensation who are at the center of either upholding, prosecuting, but also ensuring that the provisions of the constitutions are upheld. And the human rights being a core of that. By the way, just for your information too, the 1995 Constitution is so unique that the Constituent Assembly thought that we should reserve a whole chapter specifically for the human rights. It speaks to the spirit, the intention, and the goodwill of the framers of our Constitution. That the Constitution, given the fact that our history had been the way it has, it is as it has been. We envisage a situation where we should not find ourselves where we were. Now, the current situation, and Mao is just one of those, and it's just very unfortunate that he has to continue serving in that position when he does not believe in what he's supposed to do. Because if you are the Minister of Justice and you come out publicly and say the state of the human rights is beyond me to prosecute it or even defend it, you shouldn't be in the first place. You should not be in that office. The decent thing is to pave way, allow those that could potentially either serve the government of the day or dance to the tune of the day be there. The track record of Chairman Mao has been very good as far as the question of governance and democracy in our country has been. And so for the country to receive a report of that nature, it's very unfortunate. Two, I think Mao is one of those many people who, whereas their conscience is in the right place, due to their position, they have very limited leeway to have a substantial or divergent view. Actually, many of those state officials, they have actually opted to stay away cameras and just allow either of to just watch how things are flowing. And so, if you look at the track record of human rights in Uganda, the statement by the Minister of Internal Affairs, if you look at the report behind, it lists and presents a number of letters that have been written by the head of state, giving positions on his detest towards the abuse of human rights. But it's also true that the wishes of the president takes the day. If the president wanted to see sanity in the space, as far as human rights is concerned, it wouldn't take a lot. But also, more importantly, the state in our context wields a lot of power that conversations of not knowing who is where. If I, Timothy, for example, today, even just disappeared and say I'm hiding, the state has a capacity and the machinery to check me out, to identify where I am. And so for me, first of all, I think that the state of what we are trying, the state's supposed to be providing accountability is because they are providing for what is not there, or it's such a bad state of affairs that it wouldn't be good to provide the clear accountability as it should be. But also the most unfortunate bit of it is that the institutions that are charged with the mandate of ensuring that human rights is upheld, including Parliament, which I personally, it's one of my passion institutions in the country, that the Constitution establishes Parliament with clear parameters, making laws, providing oversight, legislation, appropriation. But those must be anchored on the order, peace, development, and good governance of the country, which is very clear. So if Parliament deviates from that, then it's in total breach of the Constitution and other laws. So we have the Uganda Human Rights Commission, and sometimes my engagement with some of the staff there, you can see that they really mean good at their individual level. They wish they would do or make a change towards the state of affairs. But given the systems, the structures, and how things are done, they are incapacitated, or even they are not able to do anything. And so for me, as far as where we are today, the head of state holds a lot of power, a lot of responsibility, and therefore, if the head of state demanded and wanted things to go right, I don't see anything that would stop us from having a very clear accountability system, but also more importantly, the respect of human rights in the country.
So in your view, he bears the ultimate responsibility for the current human rights record of the government?
So first of all, human rights, the nature of human rights is a collective responsibility, meaning that it does not have colors, neither does it have any format. All of us here are potential victims of these abuses that we are discussing. If you look at, for example, the way our constitution establishes many of the institutions, the legislature, which is headed by the speaker, has a role to play and has a contribution to make towards ensuring that human rights is protected. The judiciary on the other side, which is headed by the Chief Justice, equally has a clear responsibility. Now, the head of state who heads the executive arm of government has a clear responsibility, and that also goes to the extent of the citizenry. If you look at, for example, Article 2 of the Constitution, it gives power to the people to protect and ensure that the Constitution to defend the Constitution. Now, the Constitution gives us, as the people, a responsibility for which we must be aware to execute it in whichever manner However, given the fact that there are still issues as far as structure is concerned, and so the question of ultimate responsibility, whereas the head of state bears the ultimate responsibility, at least from where I look at things, I think there is a role and there is what we could do as an institution. If Parliament decided and paralyzed the operations of this country, human rights, whereas we may not achieve 100% of what we desire as far as human rights is concerned, we can get somewhere. Parliament, of course, there's been arguments that that Parliament cannot necessarily appropriate money, as limited power in terms of choosing whether they appropriate or not. But Parliament has that power of appropriation. Every time you see Parliament, for example, is considering and passing the bill, every vote of government has to be voted on. And if Parliament said the ministry A is responsible and you failed us, we are not going to appropriate money to that institution, they actually can. The unfortunate bit of where we find ourselves today, for example, if you see the Speaker issuing directives to the opposition, yet it's an issue that has been raised by the opposition, it now appears as though it's a fight between, or it's a contestation between the Speaker and the opposition, which is the wrong direction. It should be Parliament tasking the executive, who have very, very clear responsibility in terms of what they are supposed to do.
Timothy, let me just counter you before I bring in Joseph again. There are those who say that given the current political dispensation, it is not possible to have those independent institutions and arms of government play their role as contemplated in the Constitution sufficiently. So doesn't then that, breach the lines? Doesn't it destroy the argument you're making that we should have the responsibility split across all the relevant and concerned institutions?
No, there are checks and balances. It's not purely set up that the executive has, it's a check and balances. But also more importantly, I choose to refuse the position that these institutions are so incapacitated. I see there are obvious things. Like say, let's use an example of this. I would imagine, and there could be conversations, maybe the head of state or the executive has interfered with the leadership of Parliament towards ensuring that the opposition is put in its place as far as the issues they are raising is concerned. If you look at the current state is within the powers of the Speaker, let alone the head of state, wherever he is because you are only demanding for accountability from those that are responsible. If you have, for example, the Speaker taking, let's say, having to allow 30 days or more for the executive to account for an issue, it tells you that there's an issue, let alone the executive, there's an issue within the system. That either it's you can see that it's now an issue between the Speaker. Within the current system, there is something that can be done. We may not realize 100% of it, but there are a couple of other benefits that potentially could come out of that.
Thank you, Timothy, for your views. Joseph, let me return to you. The statement that was presented by the minister in Parliament on Wednesday, members of the opposition have expressed strong dissatisfaction with it. There are those that have termed it as scattered. Others have termed it as inconclusive. I've also had the opportunity to read the statement. My view is that it does not satisfy the demands of the opposition, let alone the wider Uganda public, respecting the human rights situation in the country. Timothy here has made the argument that even when we are, under a very difficult political situation, some of these independent arms of government, an organ of government like Parliament, can still exert its capacity and mandate as contemplated in the Constitution and do something to redress the situation. Do you believe that our Parliament as currently constituted can achieve that objective? And also, in light of the most recent actions of the opposition members of parliament to proclaim and sustain a boycott, which they have now suspended to, I think, engage further with government?
You know, the problem is that most Ugandans, despite some of us shouting for the last certainly 35 years that we live under dictatorship, that this regime is a military come one-party dictatorship, that the NRA constitution that sometimes Ugandan fellow optimists want to suggest and hope that is indeed a national constitution and that it had hope for taking Uganda in a new direction, can possibly be a document to be respected. I still just come back to one square that confirms in a way part of what my sister here suggests, that if in the atrocities of 2021 election charade, unprecedented number of Ugandans are killed so crudely in the streets, particularly of Kampala, and that Mr. Museveni comes out and issues a statement, and he offers to ensure that people culpable do take responsibility, and thus far those remain in non-clarity, number one. And then number two, if even in those statements Mr. Museveni does not come out and categorically state to the citizens of this country that he and his regime have actually failed this country, because even if it were the case that he was actually dealing with it, again, this is a parliament channel, and one of the reasons why I like it is because I believe in parliamentary democracy, and part of my interests is parliamentary processes. It would be the absolute responsibility of the head of state to come up and take responsibility on behalf of government, on behalf of all institutions, as is government. And so to therefore say that, well, we failed you, the people.
Unlock me first.
Because this Mr. Museveni is a man, and these days, thanks to social media, check YouTube. There are several clips where Museveni, one, first as a bandit, would spare the word, using the word a terrorist, and two, immediately after coming to power, telling actually almost apparent lies about other governments before him. Of course, the regime, and the government, UPC. They killed people with impunity, unacceptable. This guy talked about that before coming to power. He comes to power and talks about this. That Museveni, if you play the clip about him, it should tell you that one single Ugandan who dies unnecessarily, by the way, even if they died of a motor accident, the state would then say, we've lost somebody, and particularly if traffic regulations failed them, or if perhaps the potholes in a road meant that somebody died, as a state we take responsibility. That is the government that UPC founded, and that's the government that I want for you young citizens of tomorrow, regardless of which political party. That is civility, that is civilization, and that is the government that will guarantee the future of the young citizens of this country living in a democratic Uganda. That is a government that doesn't exist now.
Let me just interject shortly.
Sure, yeah.
You reference the past governments, the government of Idi Amin, the government of UPC. Are you absolving them of human rights violations? Because history doesn't seem to agree with you. There are well-documented, reports of some of the egregious human rights violations that those governments orchestrated. Here in Uganda, there is even one authoritative report of the Justice Order Commission. I'm afraid I think the contents have not been publicly shared, but there is a statement of the president where he quoted and said, referencing the rule of Idi Amin, that it was a conclusion first the finding and the conclusion of that report, that that's something that Ugandans should forget on account of the rampant human rights violations that were committed then. Isn't it disturbing that you seem to whitewash those wrongs and only claim that maybe it's the NRM that should take total responsibility for these wrongs?
I know you have a journalistic responsibility to play devil's advocate, but at no time would you trust what I've said to indicate and suggest that particularly atrociously that I would seek to want to absolve Idi Amin's regime with the NRA atrocities. But Mr. Museveni's regime, you know, if you put in a pedestal of keep fundamental human rights abuse from day one, January 1986, January 26th, I was at Makerere University's Mitchell Hall, and I saw these little boys dragging arms, you know, guns taller than them, in Mitchell. That in itself is a fundamental human rights abuse. Using children, you know, as equipments of war, not so? So on January 26th, you can begin to list them. So from January 1986 to today, Saturday, the 2nd of December, 2023, we list NRA atrocities, including some of the subjects that the NRA minister, junior minister, goes to Parliament and insults Ugandans on in attempting to defend themselves. I would. But likewise, I could actually list, again, from January 1971, listing Idi Amin's atrocities in this country. Interestingly, Amin, of course, his target was UPC, and his target was, you know, all the citizens of Uganda eventually. I wouldn't do that. But the interesting thing is, and I want to say it in this program, that actually if you list, and the good thing is that it's a young panel, and I can see, particularly your camera group is full of young, fantastic producers and technical people, and I'm always very excited by this, that this country has got a future. You guys go ahead and research. Just think about it, including some of the parliamentarians watching. They should use some of their pocket change to offer a research so that we list human rights abuses under Amin and Museveni. Do you know what? Very, 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 very likely Museveni's list in terms of key human rights abuses will double that of Idi Amin. I'm not saying that that absolves Idi Amin. Now, when you bring in Milton Obote's government, oh no, I am fine defending that. I am almost his de facto president of Uganda People's Congress. But I also recognize circumstances of alleged human rights abuses at the time. No, I was giving context about previous administrations versus NRA. I was not absorbing these governments. For those of UPC, I am an authority. I will have a conversation on any issues, including the suggested abrogation of the 1966 Constitution, Constitution 1966, yes, which I can do with absolute confidence.
But
because
was it abrogated or it wasn't?
You used those words, and I'm picking it from you. You know, in fact, you did, because the Constitution in 1966. Do you know what was at stake? What was at stake is a conversation again that your audience need to go and look. That was our independence 1962 Constitution, and the circumstance of that was that the president of the Republic, that was then president of the titular president, who was then Sir Edward Mutesa, mobilized and organized and sought to want to overthrow his government. And that's the circumstance under which UPC government, which was a partner government with KY, found themselves. That is, I think, a subject that Makerere University law professors, and indeed we can have a debate here on that. That was the context of that so-called abrogation of the
law professors talk about it as a crisis, as a 1966 crisis.
They talk about it because many of the law professors of these days are actually cadres, aren't they? Some of them are NRA cadres, aren't they? And that is a big thing that we need to be able to have a conversation on. But this is a very important point. This country needs to reach a stage in which you're able to look at issues clearly and objectively and in non-partisan way.
But for 30 years, we have not had the 1995 Constitution undergo a revolution. You see, in law, we talk about a revolution. When you dump a constitution, or when something happens to that constitution, there have been amendments that have tried to follow a certain format, which is not acceptable to the citizens of Uganda, but it has not amounted to that constitution being dumped, thrown away, and a new one instituted in the pigeonhole.
No, by the way, that was a misleading thing. And you're the lawyer and I'm not. But I can tell you actually the 1966 things thanks to victors trying to make history. You know, this was both cases were debated by Parliament. And by the way, the Parliament that debated, you know, the 1966 Constitution and actually 1967 Constitution were both elected parliaments. Those were democratically elected parliaments. And by the way, many members of KY voted for that. Many members of DP voted for that. Of course, most members of UPC voted for that. Do you know the 1995 Constitution, young man? The 1995 NRA Constitution was a constitution that was promulgated, whose Constituent Assembly, you know, was constituted with political parties banned. In the whole world, there is no constitution I know, no democratic constitution that has ever had a Constituent Assembly with members with political parties banned, meaning absent from them. That is how atrocious. That is let me just make the point that you guys can do that, because it's a very important point always, and I know people always want to run with it, and in many cases people run with it, you know, without necessary context with it.
In a minute, Mr.
That
Joseph.
Constitution of this NRA Constitution, yeah, the CA political parties had been banned. Leaders of opposition, like in Milton Obote, the founding president of this country, was in exile. So in other words, political parties had their hands like this. For example, I give you Article 269 of the original Constitution that banned the political parties' venture. It was promulgated in 1995. That's one of the most insulting things that were done in 1995. I have asked people, go ahead and ask Maimuko Odoke, who proposed the provision articles for that. The advance I'm trying to make here is that NRA, from coming to power, Mr. Museveni wanted to run this regime his way. So some of the human rights abuses we're trying to discuss is basically to force open the, if you like, the artificiality of this regime. So many Ugandans think we're in a democracy. We are not.
Charity. Mr. Joseph makes the comparison between the previous regimes vis-a-vis the current regime, the NRM regime. Now, in the context of human rights, the promotion and the respect for human rights, we have a notorious case of Mr. Chibalama. He's, as we understand from his political party, he was an avid supporter of the party. The wife reports one evening he goes missing from home. There are several witnesses who corroborate the events of what happened. And I think the government up to now has not come up with a sound explanation as to the whereabouts of the gentleman, Mr. Chibalama. Is it a case of an evasion of responsibilities, the government abdicating from its responsibility as contemplated in the Constitution to account for the citizenry? Or you think this is the modus operandi of the NRM government, as Mr. Joseph has been alluding to? Do you see this case being resolved just as a flagship of the so many
human rights cases that we have? First, I want to say that the case of Chibalama is unfortunate, because I have on several occasions said, one, he was entitled to his life. He was arbitrarily arrested. If he was a criminal, he was supposed to have been produced in the courts of law. That is the procedure. That's what the law, which Joseph now disputes, as having been promulgated by just a few people while others are hands tied. And I wanted to explain that. I wanted to explain it to the young people. Well, this is what we talk about academically. Let me give
fair enough, actually.
Let me give the academic angle. The academic angle is when NRM took over power, they were ruling by a decree. A decree of 1987, because they could not adopt the constitution which had been there before, saying that constitution was not representative of the views of the people. So what the NRM did was to come up with decree number 1 of 1987, and they incorporated some of the views from the previous constitutions and started to rule and govern Uganda. But you see, in a democracy, you cannot rule people, even a state. You cannot be called a state to relate with other states in the international sphere, except when you have a grand norm, which is called the Constitution. So they underwent a constitutional process where they got this Constituent Assembly from all over Ugandans, all Ugandans, representatives of Ugandans across all tribes were in that Constituent Assembly. Now, what was important was representation of the citizens of Uganda. not necessarily just political parties. Why? The NRM argued that sectarianism had been a rife thing which had caused war and bloodshed. Sectarianism, tribalism, and what was the other one?
I don't know. This is
they like sectarianism, it was tribalism, and that is what had caused hatred. Because remember, there was DP,
religious
and,
differences.
DP, Catholic, and Protestants who had been fighting each other. And then we also had tribal sentiments,
Allegedly.
which were high-level tribal sentiments. So at 1987, it was agreed by government and citizens who were consulted, by the way, in the Constituent Assembly, all Ugandan citizens were consulted on this constitution. And that is why the constitution starts by saying, we, the people of Uganda, in the preamble. So Joseph, if he's a Ugandan, he cannot exonerate himself.
I wasn't consulted.
You were in the UK.
No, but my UPC members in this country, no.
They were consulted.
No, look.
And there
you make the point. No,
there are two members of the political party.
There are 2 members of a political party and 10 members, 10 soldiers. So the Constituent Assembly provided for 2 members of a political party, for the political parties, and 10 soldiers. Can you imagine? Constituent Assembly for this NRA constitution. Never anywhere in the world, and I give you guys go and research it. Number 2, very quickly, if you don't mind, and it's a fair point, because we need to make the argument for that.
We need to have conversation around the constitution.
You know, the fact that this bunch came from the bush, came and overthrew their colleagues, you know, then you come in military and you say you banned political parties. They banned political parties. There is no difference between Idi Amin and Museveni. Because Amin also took over power, went in, and he could say he calls a meeting in Kisoko, my sub-country headquarters, or calls one in Bukwo, you know, in a sub-country headquarters in Sebe, and says you consult the people. I am simply saying constitutional making process, and you go back to your law professors. Really, I do not know any country, because governance is politics, you know.
But
so if governance is politics, no. And by the way, there is something cheeky that, including it, but in this, that people even try to refer to 1966. That's what I'm trying to say. 1966, whatever was happening, we had a democratically elected government, you know, with the elected parliament. Now, to want to, and that's why I say every time people bring 1966 versus this NRA thing, there's no way in which the NRA thing can reign supreme over it.
But Joseph, I have to counter you on that point.
Sure, go on.
You should recall that after the second president of the Republic, Dr. Prometo Obote, abrogated the 1966 constitution, he single-handedly drafted a new constitution,
which he put in the
inserted it in the pigeonhole boxes of the members of parliament, and subsequently banned all political parties and activity in the country, effectively turning the country into a one-party state. So some of the things that you accuse Museveni of, I think are things that we've seen in the past, but that does not take away.
Very quickly.
Our responsibility to
I want to
examine his political record and see it for what it is. I just wanted to correct that.
But that's not. It's actually it's an enigma.
When your airtime comes back, you go back to
you have to go back.
Obote.
Very quickly. It's important. It's important actually. And unfortunately, you'll have to live with me and the UPC, and you'll have to live with Museveni. An atrocious 40 years. No, there is no ban of political parties. Nobody, including the law here, there was never a ban on political parties in 1969. Nobody can show evidence. So that is again another lie. You know, Museveni has been around.
No, it's a proclamation.
No,
that Obote made.
No, which proclamation?
In Logogo.
No.
I think you should look up some of those archives. It is.
No. For the viewers of this country, political parties were never banned in the 1960s by Obote. They were never banned. That's a matter of fact.
You should recall, by 69, Ben Chwanka was in jail.
No, Ben Chwanka, the leader of opposition,
Sir Edward had been exiled.
No. Ben Chwanka was in prison. That is absolutely true. Ben Chwanka was in prison because he was directly responsible for the assassination attempt of the president. And that's a fact. And by the way, talking about human rights abuses, I wanted to bring this in the later part of the conversation. That some of the accusations, because I can defend every aspect of human rights abuses under a UPC administration because I am schooled on it, not to explain it away, but to contextualize them with the UPC perspective of answers. That's what I'm trying to say.
Let me evolve.
So that's Ben Chwanka and those are the
my airtime, and I want to fight for my space.
Actually, he is, yes.
And my space I'm fighting for is because of Chibalama. So for Chibalama, accountability needs to be done. accountability has been done in terms of a report has been put in Parliament, which is a good start. But government now needs to tell us whether they don't know his whereabouts, who arrested him, who are these people that arrested him along Gayaza Road, whom the wife talks about. Because the wife reported to police, there is a police case, there is a file. When you report something to police, because now the minister has said some people did not report, but the case of Chibalama was reported. So for him, actually, squarely, he should be accounted for, because the minister said on the floor of Parliament that the ones who have not reported to police, it is difficult to account for them because the process begins with the report coming from police. So, okay, Chibalama's report is with police. And if the police therefore has the report coming from the family, then let the police produce a report on where Chibalama is, because that's what the minister has said on the floor of Parliament. Minister said, and we're talking about institutions. On the floor of Parliament, he has said, if you report it to the police, we are going to investigate until we come to a conclusion. So now they need to come back and tell us on this day, this was reported, either the file was closed or the file was not closed, or we are still investigating. Like he said, some of the cases they are still investigating. How far have they gone with the investigation? This issue has to be put to bed comfortably. If it is not, then indeed the atrocities still exist. The arbitrary arrests that the Constitution talks about still exist. The denial of liberties, personal liberties, still exists. The lack of fair hearing still exists, as the Constitution envisaged that we would not have the lack of fair hearing. What had happened in the case of Matovu was that Matovu was not being given fair hearing, and so came a constitutional clause on fair hearing, and came non-derogable rights, which determine that
As
you
you
will
conclude,
never
Charity.
be, you will never be tortured, there will never be slavery, there will never be issues of you not being heard and given bail, fair hearing. These issues are critical to the Constitution that my friend Joseph doesn't believe in, but they are the tenets that seem to give a semblance to these human rights that we want to put a face to.
Thank you, Charity. This is the Focus on Parliament show on Civic Space TV. We now take a short break. We shall be right back after this.
National Water and Sewage Corporation is committed to providing cost-effective, clean, safe and reliable quality water and sewage solutions in urban centers across Uganda. National Water and Sewage Corporation reaffirms its commitment to 100% service coverage, geographical expansion, infrastructure development, water quality, pro-poor initiatives, customer care and stakeholder engagement, catchment and water source protection. Be a water hero. Pay your bills to zero balance. Report all leaks, busts, and illegal water connections to enable us serve you better. Reach us through our toll-free numbers on 0800 200 977 or 0800 300 977. You can also communicate with us through any of our online platforms or visit the National Water and Sewage Corporation office nearest to you. This message is brought to you by National Water and Sewage Corporation.
Welcome back from that break. This is the Focus on Parliament show on Civic Space TV. Our topic for discussion today is accountability for human rights violations in Uganda. Joining me is a distinguished panel of two gentlemen and one lady, Mr. Ochieno, Charity, and then Timothy here. Timothy, we start off the second round of the discussion with you. We left it at a point where there was a sharp debate between Mr. Ochieno and then Charity regarding the reconciliation of the past vis-a-vis the present. We want to understand, in Parliament, there seems to be a wedge, a split. There are voices, strong voices, especially from the ruling party, who argue that human rights is not an issue that Parliament should be primarily preoccupied with. They claim that Parliament has got more other pressing issues for the population, like budget and whatnot, which should take priority. Whereas for the opposition, they feel that this goes to the very core and root of the governance question in the country. Now, we've seen the opposition members of Parliament suspend their boycott to return to Parliament. They were present when the minister read the statement. We've seen reactions off the record we want to understand, do you think this is something that they are willing to sustain in the event that they find the report of the minister unsatisfactory to their demands?
Yeah, thank you. Before we went for a break, Mr. Ochieno had given an elaborate history, but also highlighting how the 1995 Constitution could have fallen short of their expectations. I think that listening to Ochieno, I find a bit of variance in terms of the veracity of the history that we do have and the one being presented. So if you look at the manner, and there are quite a number of how constitutions comes in place. Consultations and these sort of approaches of there are very many types of how constitutions come in place. So including the some of those that are unconstitutional overthrowing, like the 1966 constitution. But I think it's key to also look at the context of how some of these constitutions come in place. So the 1962 constitution, it was largely a transitional constitution. And even the engagements, the discussions, it was a bargain of both the how do you call it? Colonial government and the people here. For which, if you look at the discussions, right from the discussions of having Ugandans going to Lancaster,
you know,
to discuss about the constitution,
instead
and
of
all that
discussing it here.
that was the context in which the 1962 constitution is birthed. Two, the 1966, in 1996 it's overthrown, and then we adopted the pigeonhole constitution. Now, the 1995 constitution, whereas there could be issues as far as how it came in place, there are very few dissenting views on the relevance, but also the applicability of our 1995 constitution. Actually, if you try to compare our 1995 constitution with many other constitutions, let alone the non-inclusivity of some of the political parties, it's actually a very, very good constitution. It's just that we failed to actualize it and implement it in the manner that it had been envisaged. Now, look, coming maybe to the question of Parliament, I'm not sure of whether it's true that the NRM members of Parliament have come out to mention that the human rights issues are secondary. But if that's the state, I think that is very unfortunate, because human rights issues are not only a Ugandan issue, but it's a universal matter. And two, we not only subscribe to our constitution, of course, which is the grand norm, but we are also we are bound by the international conventions, principles, but also some of those that we've ratified.
Correct.
And so it's very, very key to look at it from that lens. Now, it's also very unfortunate to see that the human rights conversations are now reduced to NRM, opposition, NUP, and that kind of the conversation.
Very sad.
I've seen there was a meeting just I think a few days ago between the victims of the human rights issues in the recent past with the leadership of the opposition party and some of the executive members, and you could see the family members, the children, trying to make a case of why their parents are not there, the suffering, and all the other issues that come along with some of these abuses. And so the question of human rights, it's actually very big than just having the NRM trying to pull back and these ones trying to make a case for it. But I think that it would be proper that the opposition sustains this as much as possible. Because also I know that the other sometimes the politics of the day can end up shadowing the decisions that some of these some of our leaders take.
Sustain it by staying out of plenary.
So because it's a decision of the opposition, but also it's true there are other political decisions that happen on the corridors of parliament that actually can end up frustrating that push, or providing a reduced momentum for that. So after the government presented the statement, we hope to receive the statement from the opposition on Tuesday, just trying to provide a response, but also trying to clarify some of the assertions that the government put in place. So for me, I think that in the current sitting, it's possible for the opposition to put up a stronger case. That is only if the leadership of parliament gets to appreciate that this matter is not between the leadership and the opposition. It's rather to task the executive, whose, after all, it's their mandate to provide an accountability. The role of parliament primarily, as far as oversight is concerned, there are many mechanisms within parliament that members of parliament can explore to ensure that they demand accountability from the executive. And so some of those are those, say, the Prime Minister's question times, statements, and even the option of getting out or trying to stay out of plenary sittings. Actually, I think that it is their right, but also it's constitutional that they can actually choose, depending on, in the event that all the other options fail. But also it should speak to the core, or the important role of how the human rights question in the country is concerned. So if, for example, today, and God forbid, Mr. Ochieno here is picked by unknown people, is taken to an ungazetted place, while it's true that the country may actually want to move ahead, there are other people. So even the space is a great member of the Civic Space TV. That's a resource gone. And so for me, I think that it must be that we now bring on board the people. The people must be at the center of this, and not just leave it for the leaders. I know that the leaders are. It's good that they are putting some pressure and there's momentum, but the people, we should be able to also get into this and try to demand for accountability for many of these issues.
Let me come to you, Mr. Joseph, on the issue of accountability. History is replete with a multitude of examples whereby perpetrators of human rights atrocities and violations in different jurisdictions have been apprehended, prosecuted, and justice accordingly dispensed to the victims. We saw this post-World War in Germany. We saw the Choto trials in Japan. Even, I think, in the most recent history in Rwanda, we saw the Arusha trials. We are now interrogating the element of accountability. In the event that we are successful as a country to emerge from this mire, what do you think should be the way forward, respecting the accountability question?
Yeah. I'm not quite sure whether this conversation will take us a long term anywhere, unless and until we have a change of government. But I must say that I've already served my disappearances, as Timothy is saying. As I said, I disappeared. I don't know generally most of the places I spent time in when I was arrested as a student in Makerere University. So the only person who's trying to disappear for a moment is possibly, no, they're out there. So, but the person who should be one of these days maybe should test prison is Mr. Museveni. But he's a good guy. You should test prison maybe for a few hours before we retire him in Rakitura. No, the question of accountability in this country is extremely important. We are operating under a regime which is operating under absolute impunity. They've had impunity for 40 years, and they're doing so because they know and they think that nobody can do anything because the citizens have been made helpless. The institutions of parliament, the institutions of the legislature, and all other sensible institutions these days, including religious organizations, they're just doing and saying no change. So they know they get away with it. In my Tororo the other day, just a few weeks ago, Tororo is one of the 39 original districts under the NRA Constitution, and Tororo is the district that has not one single new tarmac road since NRA came to power. Nagongera Road, Nagongera Tororo Road is a road to my home, which under the illustrious UPC administration was supposed to have been tarmacked in 1989. The road now is like shambles, and so power belongs to the people. People mobilized and organized to demonstrate, to demand for the road to be tarmacked. And cheeky NRA bandits organized and mobilized to throw issues and things on them, including arresting 2 serving councillors. People talk about electing particularly 2 serving councillors, and 3 of them went to prison. That matter is up. I am very interested in that issue. I hope that common sense prevails and the charges against these councillors and another individual are dropped, and that these things do not happen again. It's part of the continuation we want to continue, because we're talking accountability. I went and met the police chief, regional police chief, and he seemed to suggest that one of the reasons why they did so was that they could not guarantee that the people who went to the street could throw stones or not, which is part of the suggestion being made. No, that's the responsibility of the state. That's and institutions, as partly as Timothy said. The state has got the machinery capacity to apply sensible intelligence to preempt thoughts in terms of what's likely to happen. But also we pay these guys, don't we? We pay them, to do that, including to go and police that processes. So in the unlikely event that the demonstrators go out unruly, you arrest them and arraign them before the legitimate courts of law. I have conducted many demonstrations against Mr. Museveni. By the way, I had, this is official, I led many anti-Museveni demonstrations in UK, and no, very successful, very organized. And many times I disappointed the police when I said, the police asked me, Joseph, how many people do you expect? Then I said, possible about 100. And then 70 turn up. And the police said, oh, would you expect 100 people? So they laugh off. That is the role of policing. That is, in part, talking the accountability thing. Do you know what? Sometimes when you do those demonstrations, come 9th October, we would demonstrate and say, Mr. Museveni, independence is coming here, and it's an illegitimate state. So here, when you say accountability, a road has not been done in a particular district for 37 years, but now we have some roads that go including to Katokral. There are roads that go to Katokral in this country, but the whole district does not have a new road. And citizens of this country say, where do our taxes go? And they said, you go ahead and whip them. Accountability how? Then there are some local people in politics who are smartened by NRA patronage. Say, don't annoy the person in Mr. Museveni. He's promised that you will see how monies are pushed there for your roads, but you'll get him and also to know better. No, I generally think that there is the subject being discussed, and particularly if you look at the statement on human rights abuses, it is defensive, aspects of it is arrogant, but in a way, in many cases, it is one in which there's a sense of feeling that you can't push the regime. One, because the National Assembly, in a way, does not have the teeth. The majority of the members belong to one organization, and many of them are yes. Now, some of these yes have conscience. You guys, some of these guys have conscience, because they talk to us, but they dare not do so because they know that, well, they might be voted against, they might be undermined, and the next election they will not be given extra money to steal, or they will not be sent police officers to make sure that their votes disappear, even during NRA primaries. I think that we need to continue having this conversation, and at this stage, I want to bring back the issue of political parties and leadership. 40 years of one-party monolithic dictatorship is a long time. And 40 years of single narrative where NRA is goddish and the rest are devilish. He has done it in such a manner that even you guys in the media, you sometimes don't have any clue. People go to law school and they don't know that in 1963, there's a constitutional amendment that provided for Sir Edward to become Prime Minister of this country and rather President of this country, and it was backed by UPC. People don't know that. So that is how bad these things have been.
No,
I am asking, just briefly, I'm asking, that political leaders emerge across all the political divide. Political parties, existing political parties, and I've argued during the recent debate around FDC that I hope that no splits and more parties are created. I think we've got enough political parties. What we just don't have enough is leaders. That the leaders, friends of mine in other political parties that emerge, take responsibility. We begin to bring Uganda, the nation, around at the center. We begin to have a conversation in which political party leaders in the opposition, together with the leaders in NRA, we begin to have a conversation to say, look, guys, enough is enough. Impunity, no. Accountability, the kind of thing we're trying to say, our people should not be whipped enough. Whoever whipped more in Luwero is neither here nor there. But people have been whipped enough. We need to be able to make sure that the rule of law applies and that legislators who eventually end up in the National Assembly go on to do what they're going to do, but not go to do things on the basis of instructions from a very, very tough Madam Speaker, or indeed from a very, very tough directive from State House.
Thank you. Mr. Timothy, the question of accountability. The Honorable Justice Mao gave a solemn pledge to Ugandans that the reason as to why he had joined Mr. Museveni in his government was to facilitate a comprehensive, consultative dialogue process with the opponents of the regime to thrash out certain issues with a view of harmonizing and then implementing a peaceful and orderly political transition in the country. We are now some 2 years into the implementation of that agreement. We do not see any results. The human rights situation by the day is deteriorating further, and the Honorable Minister Mao is still a member of the executive.
Sure.
Respecting the question of accountability, what would be your take? Because in government, there are people that have been adversely implicated and named severally as serial human rights abusers. Some of them still hold very high, sensitive positions, both in the military, but also in the political spheres of government. How should we navigate this question as a country?
So I think that, so first addressing the issue of Chairman Mao, I think that the systems are too strong to be changed by an individual. The individual's wishes, the individual's desires, and even the goodwill that they may be having. The goodwill by Chairman Mao may be something that maybe may not be questioned, but what is the ability and capacity of him to make any substantial change? Because it's definitely known. And he should have known that right from the start, given the character, the nature, but also the status quo as it is. That it's extremely hard to see even this transition that Honorable Mao keeps mentioning.
Are you suggesting that he resign the office?
He shouldn't actually resign. He should resign today. So because my thinking is that it's you see, as statesmen, we must be willing to take hard decisions. That if it's not serving my interest, if it is against my desires and my principles, I shouldn't be holding on because of the resources. The track record that Honorable Mao and DP by extension have had in this country is not worth it of whatever they are still holding on in government. Because if you cannot stand to defend the human rights situation in the country as it is today, what are you doing in the office in the first place? So let's just look at even within the question of parliament. If it is not human rights, who are you appropriating for the money?
Mm-hmm.
Who are you making the laws for? It's because it's for the people. At the end of the day, it is the question of human rights score on any of these things. It doesn't make sense for you to appropriate money to people who are tortured so that they do what with it. It doesn't make sense to appropriate money to a generation that is traumatized and is willing to do anything to ensure that they get justice. Because the question of human rights, by the way, is not only an issue of today, but it has a great impact on the question of tomorrow. Imagine the people that are seeing people being tortured, the young people experiencing seeing, but also being a section of them being how do you call it? Like when you're indoctrinated to believe that this is how things should be. Conditioned. So you can imagine what is the likely picture of tomorrow if we do not make a substantial change as it is today. And so I think that whereas there are people, there are individuals in government like Chairman Mao, who maybe they have goodwill and they really desire that there should be change. The system as it is today cannot allow you unless there is a substantial change. Of course, if you look at some of these things and how the accountability is actually happening, and I agree with Ochieno, at least as far as the question of accountability and the recent narrative, it is more of a defensive as opposed to the goodwill to provide an accountability, but also to just explain to what the matters or issues are concerned. If you look at the report, it's first of all almost denying most of the allegations that have been put in place. You see, it can't be that it's the state saying that we do not know where Chiwalama is. It shouldn't be the state. It should be that I can say that, or whoever can say that, but it should not be the state saying that, oh, now we do not know. How is that possible? Two, it's also extremely wrong that we are having different state officials or the executive holding totally two different positions. For example, in the case of Chibalama, that you have a prime minister who, by the way, is in the top hierarchy as far as presidency is concerned in the country, gives a different position and say that we, as the government, we have Chibalama. And then in the same report, in a different position by a different ministry, which internal affairs, they say, no, we don't know where actually. Yet, the facts that the two present are actually the same. Of course, I'm made to understand that the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, Kafuzi, suggests that the Prime Minister's remarks could have been been taken out of context, and that the two Chibalamas are two different people. That there is one who is the founder of the new political party, and the Chibalama that is in question. That's why it's a whole confusion.
The former has never been reported missing.
Although they seem to suggest that at some point in time, there was a bit of an issue at some point in time when Chibalama disappeared, the founding member of the NUP. But the person in question is the Chibalama that is not there. And so the thing is that there seems not to be goodwill, at least from those that hold the ultimate and the decision makers in this country. Two, the systems as they are today do not appreciate, do not understand, and also they cannot accommodate anything different. Because you see, if you have your people disappearing, to whose interest is it for you to have them be accounted for? It's not in the interest of us, by the way. It's in the interest of the state, because it's the one which is charged with that mandate to protect its people. So even when they are accounting, it's not that they are doing us a favor, or now we are providing them with an accountability, and we say it's not in our interest. We have a role to play, but it's in the interest primarily of the state, because that is their responsibility. And if they are not doing it, they're just being they are breaching the constitution spirit.
Charity, the accountability question. In the constitution, we see a variety of forums where a citizen can run to in case their rights are infringed on or violated by either a fellow citizen or the state. We have the Uganda Human Rights Commission. We have the whole judiciary under Article 126 and its various, branches that are under. Presently, there is a general feeling that some of those institutions are under state capture. They are strongly compromised, and some of them are even servile to the state. They are subservient to the wishes of the state. So people feel that there are not forums where they can go and have their matters properly adjudicated, and as such, they obtain redress. The question of accountability, Timothy has pointed out correctly that Uganda is now a country immersed in a sea of trauma. We see trauma that we've accumulated from the past. Now we have fresh trauma under the NRM regime for now almost 40 years. How do we navigate through this question?
Very tough question again. How do we navigate the question of accountability? I think the first thing that Timothy, and I agree with him 100%, says, let's not take human rights for granted. Let's not want to make this a very simple and a wishful process that, you know, we can explain away whatever we want to explain away and get off with it. Because what you do to someone today will be done to you tomorrow. And it's a fact. If you choose, you want other people to wallow in pain because you're not giving accountability, proper accountability for what you know could have happened, then be ready to wallow in the same pain tomorrow. When POMA here was created, the POMA, the Public Order Management Bill, it was created by Amama Mbabazi, the Honorable Amama Mbabazi. He walked into spaces of power and said, you know, one of the things we need to do is to restrain these Ugandans from expressing themselves in terms of assembly. This is too much freedom that they have. And so POMA was generated, implemented, and enacted. And a few years down the road, while he campaigned to be president in 2016, the same POMA was applied on him. And so it can so happen, and why the origin of why we must respect human rights is important is because anybody is a candidate for human rights violation and human rights abuse. Anybody could be abused by anyone, but is there a justice system? Is there a way, like you have said, there are people who are saying there is state capture, and it is true. Every time we've seen a political issue being sent to the court, the way it is adjudicated shows that there is state capture. We also appreciate from, of course, the academic point of view that every time there are political cases, even internationally, even in international spaces, there will be influence on how that political case turns out. But when you look at FDC, for example, and what happened just within FDC, FDC said, we are going to go to court and we're going to make sure that Katonga is normal. And exactly how FDC said it is how it turned out in court. And then FDC also came and said, look here, the police is going to give us protection, and it will not provide protection for Katonga, and Katonga will not be able to even carry out their conference. And police actually issued a statement saying, Katonga, you cannot hold any conference, you cannot consult the people you say you want to represent. Now, if you constitutionally now go back to the actual constitution and Article 29, is Katonga allowed to associate? Is Katonga allowed to opine in the constitution the same way the other FDC is supposed to opine and associate? In my view, yes, the constitution allows both of them to associate and opine. But here is a court that decides that no, when it comes to this one, we are taking this journey. Is it in tandem with what the constitution then provides? And so because we have a lot of those gaps that are happening within the way our laws are being implemented and interpreted, then our institutions are continually being undermined, the citizenry are continually being traumatized, and then we have a loss of hope in what was supposed to give us hope. Because the constitution was supposed to give us hope, we have a lot of hopelessness emerging out of failure to implement it the way it exists. So going forward, in terms of accountability, therefore,
what mechanism would you recommend?
The mechanism I recommend, one, is to strengthen the institutions themselves. I'm going to give you the example of Uganda Human Rights Commission. Uganda Human Rights Commission is being poorly funded right now by the government. And most of them, like Timothy has told you, at the technical level, they feel they want to document issues and have them documented for posterity. You see now Ochieno has been telling us here that in his time they did not document. We don't have documentation that we can reference. But if there is documentation, 20, 40 years from today, those issues can still be revisited. That's why you see in the massacre of Rwanda, they revisited what had happened in the genocide much later, based on what the documentation was saying. And so they mapped out a way of where they said a genocide should not happen there again. And it's the same thing we need now, that our institutions should be funded well to allow for proper documentation of the issues as they are happening. If accountability is being done, pick that accountability report as it is submitted, documented. The good thing, it is on the Hansard right now. We have the government document now on the Hansard, and we await the opposition document to get onto the Hansard. But I think the opposition should not be intimidated from asking for accountability. They should be given sufficient room to continue to demand for accountability. That's the way forward. The more you intimidate them, the more you issue threats, the more you fail them from demanding for accountability, the worse you make a bad situation appear. So in the view of the grand scale of issues as they exist right now, the best way is allow them room to continue to demand for what they are demanding, give accountability for as much as you know, continue to search for information from these families. Let the state go and reach out to the 18 missing people and hear from the families firsthand. Come up with reports from each of the 18 families, put it out for the citizens of Uganda to hear and know. What do the families know? What have they been told? Have they been compensated? Have they not been compensated? There then the state has begun to demonstrate that yes, we are still committed to the question of accountability. We are still committed to the question of human rights. Because if we don't do that, then we are saying we don't want human rights, we don't want accountability, which are two key tenets for democracy to flourish.
Joseph, the question of human rights, many jurists and of course political observers contend that in many respects it's also a question of politics, because political actors determine the scale of respect, promotion and observance for human rights. In Kenya, in the post-political violence of 2007, there was a huge debate. There are those who favored a local tribunal to try the perpetrators of the political violence, whereas there is a whole section that advocated for the International Criminal Court to try the same perpetrators. Fortunately or unfortunately, the latter group won. These individuals were tried and acquitted by the court. Now, with respect to Uganda's situation, in the event that we have a successful restoration of, good governance, constitutionalism, respect for multi-party politics, and whatnot, what approach would you favor? Do you foresee a situation where we constitute a local tribunal in Uganda to try these perpetrators, or you would prefer that we have an independent international forum where these cases should be adjudicated so that the victims can obtain justice?
It's an important question, but as you say, as Charity suggests, thanks in part to impunity and thanks to the breakdown of systems and institutions in this country, I am not officially president of Uganda People's Congress. I was elected in December 2020 as president of Uganda People's Congress. And thanks to internal fighting of the process, because these things, when society gets embroiled in a mess, it sinks in like that Kenyan writer talks about the madness of an entire nation, of how it erodes onto the population. So in parts of UPC is not exceptional. So I went to court, merely judicial review, seeking a judicial review which should not take more than 6 months, in March 2021. This matter did not come to, it was never came formally in front of a judge until September 13th last year. A High Court judge, albeit an acting judge who possibly has a point to prove, I hope not, in a very decent experience, tells us that, it is unacceptable how long this thing has taken, and he committed himself to delivering the judgment on the 9th of December, 2022, last December. It will be now 7 days to exactly 1 year, waiting merely for a judgment. And the judgment of a political case, a political matter, and a matter so important because it involves the leadership of a political party and the leadership of the largest, once upon a time, the largest and the oldest political party in this country, and the only political party that has been elected, into power in government, and happens to be a position for mine, who in, I think May 21st, 2005, I called a press conference in Uganda House to deal exactly with this issue. Botto was then still alive in Zambia, and Haji Badru Regulo was my boss at Uganda House, and I called for a National Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I did that because the conversation Mildred Bor and I and others had been having for a very long time, from the early 90s, how messy this country has been subjected to by gunmen and very few gun women in the past, and continuing with Mr. Museveni, and how we hoped that we needed to put an end to this, and that a likely UPC administration, one in which UPC has got majority influence, that we don't return to this. And so then the question was, how do we do it? I was privileged to then engage myself with the leaders of the African National Congress to see what happened in South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which, remember, as a young person, you tend to be very radically to the left. I thought they were rather very unfair. In fact, when I saw the way they were treating Winnie Mandela particularly, I still believe they were very unfair, to Winnie Mandela and a number of people in ANC, and I thought the white Boers got away with huge amount from that. And so, atrocities, and if you see the continued mini social class out of political experience existing, a few privileged Africans together with the Boers enjoying the privilege of the majority of South Africans, I look back and wonder. So it's an important debate. Do we go through that process? I am still reasonably persuaded to that effect, that the future of this country possibly will lie in an environment in which there is at least a hybrid of a truth, national truth-telling and healing, and reconciliation, as it were.
Under this government, there have been attempts.
If you don't mind, let me just conclude this.
Just make a short reference. The Odero Commission, just after the emergence of the NRM government, in I think it was 87 or thereabout. Have you had the opportunity to read these findings?
I did, and I was going to bring it. I was going to bring it. That was a charade. It's an NRA charade. If you look at the Odero thing and you look at what the last vice president of this country, Paul Mwanga, said in that commission, and the fudge thing that was brought to him, again, some of you guys will ask for records. Those are at least you can find. And you see how messy this NRA is and how well designed they were. And of course, they came with big things. They came with inspectorate of government, posh, wasting our money, inspectorate of government. So they created institutions to sound posh and look really educated and intelligent from Luwero bushes. But of course, they left scars rather than books in Luwero. No, look, looking forward, I genuinely think that the civilized way for our future as a continent is through reconciliation rather than retribution. But I continuously now worry, Charity, that my position in 2005 and my position in 2020, when I took onto this position, and what I saw in 2021, the manner in which our people were killed in the streets of Kampala, something I never knew would ever happen under any other regime under my watch, but certainly not Mr. Museveni's, who subject our people to trust in Luwero. I genuinely not. I know the rig elections, they've never been elected anyway. I was watching Kanye Hamba the other day saying quite clearly how Besigye won the election. I didn't know. My point is, I think there is a new sense of impunity in this country.
As you sum up, Mr. Joseph, yes.
There's a new sense of impunity in this country. And so how we persuade sensible voices and minds in NRA, to to become voices of reason, so that we accumulate a critical number of Ugandans across the political divide that say, you guys, we need to begin to have a discussion around a new future, and a new future where we give possibilities for good rather than the best for winners in big numbers. I don't know. So for a political party from the left of polity, a political party that saw The Hague playing its role, a political party that saw Kony being tried in The Hague and Mr. Museveni not being tried, a political party and a political leader like me who's lucky enough to have been involved in many of these cases with the Mugabe's and many other things, and to see the hypocrisy of Western systems, including the International Criminal Court. Oh yes, I have huge reservations as to whether or not those are the future. But I think somewhere, amidst a National Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or of some sort, there is need in this country for these guys who continue to loot, kill, and abuse our people with impunity to know that there must be some consequences to whatever they do going forward.
Charity, your closing remarks on the subject.
So my closing remarks is that human rights are fundamental, they are inherent, they must be respected, no matter who you are, no matter how much power you wield, no matter what you think. These are critical matters of Ugandans, and anybody, even you, who seems to have so much power, can be abused any day, and you will want justice just when you can't find it. So the most important thing is we continue to promote justice, the rule of law, and human rights.
Thank you. Mr. Timothy, your closing remarks.
Thank you. I absolutely agree with Charity. But maybe just for me, really, my parting views would be that the world is commemorating the World AIDS Day, and as a country, we're still lagging behind as far as realizing the goal of an AIDS-free country. And looking at actually the statistics and some of the numbers, including our colleagues who are in prisons, who still in question of the human rights questions. You have very many of them in prison. They are not prosecuted. Their case is not prosecuted. They are not brought to court, and there are still a lot of issues still in line with the human rights question. But still, just speaking to the question of AIDS, there's a lot of the number of inmates with HIV
No positive, yeah.
and the sort of things that happen within the prisons. And broadly speaking, as a country, I think that there's need for us to put more effort, even as we discuss the question of human rights, look at the question of HIV/AIDS. There's need for more awareness, but also there's need for more resources put in place to ensure that we counter this vice. The theme for this year really goes to taking the fight to the people, meaning that we put the people at the center of the fight against HIV. And I think that we have to be deliberate towards addressing this issue. Otherwise, we may have a generation that is greatly affected both by the disease itself and the consequences that come along with it. Yeah.
That's an important perspective to the conversation, Timothy.
Do you mind allow me to just complement that as my conclusion? That's a fantastic conclusion, actually, in this, because actually part of the conversations, we basically concentrated on general semantics. Of course, some very important points, including the lives of other people who've been lost and disappeared. But that actually, we did not talk about health as a human right, and we don't talk about education as a human right, and we don't talk about the contextual budget contributions to specific key sectors of the economy, to key sectors of the community. And so, no, fantastically, it is the case that, no, these are matters which are going off the table, and the vast majority of the people who are living and suffering with HIV are women and young people, and most of them women and young people who are on the more vulnerable end. And if you consider what's happening in our public health system with no drugs and no corruption, no, it's an extreme one. But yes, I think solidarity, yes.
It's been a pleasure, gentlemen and lady. To our esteemed viewership, we appreciate your company up to the end of the show. This program has been brought to you by the Center for Constitutional Governance. We'll see you next week. Be blessed.